Hello everyone, I'm Marina from Frocks Frolics and today I'm going to show you how to make this gorgeous little Western blouse. The Western blouse has been a favorite for many of you for so many years. It was one of my very first patterns actually, and it's only just now getting the extension to age 12. It was age 1 to 6 and now we'll go up all the way to 12. And this is the corresponding little doll version, so you can make one for your girl and one for the doll. And if you're making the dolls for prezzies or you want to just learn how to make a blouse, how to do a collar, I've devised a new way of doing the collar actually, which is easier, especially since it's a doll's outfit. I couldn't get it done the usual way, so I've come up with something new and I hope you guys will enjoy it because it is easier, so stay tuned and keep watching. So I've already cut everything out, so let's have a look what we need to make this beautiful little Western blouse.
Let's start with the sleeve. You've got two options, short and long with a cuff, just like the boys' shirt. You need to mark the front, the top of the sleeve, and down here where we're going to have a pleat. So I'm just going to put a little snip in there and there. Then we've got the collar stand, and you can interface one side of it. You don't have to at all, but you could. And the same for the collar, you interface the side that is going to roll out to the outside if you want to do that, and mark the center back. And then we've got the yoke here. We want to mark the shoulder points, and you could reinforce that or not. I did it, but it's not necessary. Then we've got the back piece here, and you could also cut that on the fold if you liked, but I think just in case you want to do more than one and cut out more than one for doll clothes, it's so much nicer to have each piece as a whole piece. The front is cut twice and it's mirror image. And then we've got the placket as well. And the placket comes in two pieces. They're exactly the same, and you can interface half of it if you like. But again, for doll clothes, it's not really that necessary. You've got a lot of seam allowance standing in there that makes it thick as it is. The cuffs, they're at the top, they're in pink, and we want to cut two sets for those, so 4 all together. And now we want to serge the sides before we start. So on the back and on the front, we want to serge the sides, and we also want to serge them on the sleeve. And that's it. We can get started. The first thing we're going to do is to put together the yoke and the front and back bodice. So take your yoke and put it right sides facing on top of the front piece, and then we're going to pin that length. You need to have a little bit standing over the edge here, yeah, because you've got that centimeter seam allowance on both the front and the yoke, and where they intersect, that's, you know, how much they have to overlap. Sometimes when you start sewing, you're not so aware of that, and you tend to like start at the very edge and then it doesn't look smooth like that. So when you turn it, everything needs to look very smooth in the armhole and also on the other side, of course. So we repeat that on the other side, and then we're also going to put the back on. Right sides together, just flip the back over onto your yoke, and you can then put a pin in the center back, or you can put a pin either side, or no pin at all. The distances are so short that you can actually do that. I just absolutely adore making these doll clothes. It is so much fun because it's cheap, it's quick, and you get to use all those lovely rests that you have left over. Now we're going to sew it together. The seam allowance is always 1 centimeter with my patterns, unless I tell you different. So 1 centimeter for this, from one side to the other. And then afterwards we of course are going to serge all these edges as well. We do the same on the other side, and then we do the back. Remove the pins as you get to them. And that's it. Right, over to the serger. Serge all these edges and then we're going to top stitch them. What we want to do is have the seam facing into the yoke, and I'm just turning it over here because I actually like stitching from the other side. It's a preference. As long as the seam stands into the yoke, and you want to lengthen your stitch length to 3, and then we're going to go all the way across. You could also double stitch this, of course. That's also really, really cool. And the stuff that I do with the girls' blouse, and you've got a ton of ideas there in your course. When you purchase the course, then you get a load more. They're also available on YouTube, of course, in the playlist for the Western Blouse. Now we're going to put the placket on and sew it on with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Make sure that if you have put a strip of interfacing on, that is the side that is closest to the edge. Okay, so 1 centimeter seam allowance. And once we've sewn both of those on, we want to iron that seam into the placket, and then it's also already ironed in half. But if you haven't done that, then you want to do that now. And then we're going to tuck that seam allowance under on the underside, just so it covers that stitch line we've got, because we're then going to top stitch it on either side close to the edge. So stitch length 3 again, line it up with a fixed point on your presser foot, and that is something that is different for every sewing machine. I personally like the presser feet which have a plastic insert next to the metal, you know, coming towards the front with lines on them, because I can actually see where I need to top stitch. So I'm going to do this on both sides, and I've got like a little red line which is about 2 millimeters from the edge, I think, and it's very cool. It works a treat. Next we're going to work the collar. So we want the right sides facing each other. Again, one of these sides you could interface, but you don't have to for doll clothes, so you can just sew them together. And here we've got a seam allowance of 1 centimeter. We're just going to sew all the way around. Beautiful. The only thing to remember really is that when you come to a curve, that you want to have the needle stuck in the fabric before you lift the presser foot, so you don't get a kink in it. And then you work your way around stitch by stitch until you get to the end. And then you want to cut back the seam allowance, and afterwards, of course, we're going to turn it and press it, and then you could top stitch it if you like. But now comes the magic. How do I get this onto the stand? What I would do, if you're making any collar and you struggle with putting the collar on, you mark the seam allowance here, and in my pattern it is 1 centimeter, and actually in the pattern for everyone that buys this, I've added this line too, so you don't need to do it. But if you're just watching this and you're not really into the doll patterns, but you just want to know how to put a collar on, take the seam allowance. That could be a little bit more than 1 centimeter if it's a batrick pattern, right? Whatever your seam allowance is, that's what you reduce it by. And then you pin your pattern to the wrong side of the fabric of the collar stand. And you take both collar stands, and they're both facing up with the wrong side, and then we're pinning them together. And what we effectively have is now a template, so that we can then fold the fabric along the template's edge, and that way we get a really neat, lovely little curve there. And also we get one of them that is slightly longer, right? And so just make sure that both facing up with the wrong side, okay? Then you iron the first one up, use a lot of steam, and then you iron the second one up with a lot of steam, okay? Then take the pin out and put the top one at the top, so you can see the sharp edge, and the lower one here is the one that's slightly going to be wider. So I'm going to go now and press that again, because it's not quite a sharp edge like I would like yet. What you want to do is have the collar that you want to be visible, And now take the stand that is slightly longer, and that's the one we sew on. So there isn't much to be thought about here. You just need to make sure that the longer side of the collar stand sits on the collar that you want to have rolling to the outside, so that side. And then basically the collar is just sandwiched between the two layers of the collar stand. Make sure that the edges are edge to edge, you know, especially at the front part here. That's really, really important. That needs to sit just right. And then you can check as well that they're both the same. If you're making this on a girl's blouse rather than a doll's blouse, I think that would be quite important here. Well, if it's not quite right, who cares, right? But I'm sure that some of you will use this technique for the girl's blouse as well, because it's really handy and it's really fast. And then I work my way all the way around. At the front, it comes up really straight, because don't forget there's a seam allowance which will have to sit in there. And then step by step, you work your way around and sew to the end. Now, I want to show you some more stuff from the doll collection while I'm sewing across here. And you can see the Audrey pants here. I absolutely love that, with a Paris Bolero. And then we have the crop tops and the little dress. And all of these beautiful items are also available for you in the shop in girl sizes, which is of course fantastic. And we're ending here with the princess dresses, which are absolutely lovely, and you have been asking me to make a doll version for that, and I'm sorry that the princess dress will have to wait a little bit longer from the doll clothes collection, simply because it just takes the longest to do. So that will have to wait a little bit longer, but it is coming. And then you secure your stitches. Beautiful. And then we check again by putting them on top of each other that everything is the same. The stitching line sits exactly in the same spot. And then we cut back our seams. There we go. First pretty sharpish there, and then in layers at the back, because everything goes into the collar stand, right? You don't want big seam allowances that in there, and you don't want them all at the same time. You want them staggered so that it's nice and flat. You can also snip the curve. I don't think it's really necessary, but you know, better to do it, and it's a good habit anyway. Then you want to turn it and give this all a jolly good press, and then watch this magic. It is so simple and it is so quick. I'm taking my front piece, and now just watch that you put the shorter one, of course, on the outside, because one of the collar stands is slightly shorter and the longer one sits on the inside, so that you absolutely catch it, right? That's really important. And then also when you stick it in, make sure that the seam allowances are behind the front piece. That way you get a really nice edge as well. And once I've secured both sides, I do the center back. Now look at that. It's only a centimeter seam allowance. If you get a little bit more pushed in there or a little bit less, it doesn't really matter as long as it sits in there nice and flat. And you can see how it just falls in there. I mean, there's no problem at all. When I did the first collar for this, I did it the traditional way as I would for the girls' blouse, and it was way too hard to do that. So I unpicked it all and I thought, so that we're going to do this again. And I did it this way, and that actually works a treat. And I'm quite keen to try that on the girl's blouse as well, because I think it does make your life a lot easier, and why have it hard? Now what you want to do is stitch all the way around. Never start at the beginning. You could also stitch around the collar, of course. I didn't do that, but you could. And if you want to do that before. Don't start at the beginning and then sew close to the edge all the way around. Now I have to say, go around the edge really slowly, and you can also pull a little bit from the back to help you out here. That's what I'm doing, because the household machines are never that good at transporting. Even the Pfaff has got a few problems there, and it does get stuck when there are too many layers and it's right on the edge. So I'm going to go all the way around. And I hope you enjoyed this. Please leave me some comments below. It is ever so helpful for me to get noticed by YouTube. There are so many thousands and millions of videos out there, and my little videos don't get a looking. But if there are comments and likes, then I actually do, and that would be really super. If this is helpful to you, make sure that you like this video and that you subscribe and that you also leave a comment. And when I get to the end, we have put a collar on, and I dare you to try this. This is so super, so quick and simple. Right, next step. Now we're going to do the buttonholes. It's actually easier to do the buttonholes at this point than when the blouse is finished. So what we're going to do is here, I'm going to put in buttonholes, but I would recommend to you that you do cam snaps if you are at all not happy with your sewing machine and the way it does buttonholes. Because we have all these seam allowances fairly close together, and they will lie in part underneath your foot, it is harder to do. And I really struggled, and I've been sewing for 30 years and do have a good machine. If you have a mechanical machine like my secondary puff, then yeah, you can do it. Now, you want to mark the center of the placket, go up into the stand, and then move 2 millimeters over to the front. That's where your buttonhole should start for the buttonhole that goes into the stand, and that's always horizontal. And then the other buttonholes are going to be put in vertical. So all you do, once you think, ah, that looks good, and notice how the top button is a little bit closer to the button in the stand, you mark that one, and then of course you have the distance, so all you need to do is measure that, and then you go down and you measure the next one down. So in this case it's 3.2 centimeters, so I mark the next one and the next one. Now on a lot of electronic machines, I'm not sure if on all of them, but certainly on mine, the buttonhole is put in backwards, like it moves backwards to you. So for the horizontal buttonhole, I then mark the end as well. And so now the next step is to put your buttonhole into your buttonhole foot, and that will automatically give you the right length. Always try your buttonhole first and see if it actually works. That's how I do it anyway. And then you can get started and you work backwards on yourself. Don't touch that sensor, whatever you do, you know, that is so harsh when it just stops. And it did it for me about 3 times during this process, which is why I'm saying cam snaps might be a better idea for this, unless you're working with a mechanical machine where you can pull the fabric a bit to make it move. This just kept stopping. It was a nightmare. I tried it with paper, I tried it with this and that. In the end, I did get it done, but it was hard. And as you can see here, I put the mark to where my buttonhole ended, where I put it in horizontal. And so I had to measure that out from the length of the buttonhole that had been inserted vertically, and then I did it up there. The electronic machines are so sensitive, and I actually really hate putting the buttonholes in with them unless it's a very, very flat and even surface that I've got. So, but whenever do you have that on buttonholes, right? Anyway, run over. Now we're going to open the buttonholes, and you can use your quick unpick, but maybe put a pin horizontal at the top tab so that you don't accidentally slip and cut into your fabric. And then don't cut it open all the way. Check first with a button whether it's actually big enough, because sometimes the buttonholes are way longer than they need to be on some of the sewing machines. And if you cut it all open already and then they are huge and the button just pops open all the time, not a good idea. So I prefer to just fold over my buttonhole and then cut it with a scissor and go to each point. But that doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. That's just how I've done it for 30 years. So for me, that's the best way. But you do whatever feels right for you, quick unpick or with your scissor or embroidery scissor. Next, we're going to close the side seam, and then we're almost at the end. It's going to go really fast now. We're going to sew them with a centimeter seam allowance, and then you iron the seam apart, and then we're ready to do our beautiful, beautiful sleeves. And I'll tell you, you are absolutely going to adore this method. First step is to close the side seams of your sleeve. So you put them together, right sides facing, and you use a 1 centimeter seam allowance. And then we're going to sew those together. And of course, afterwards, we will iron that seam apart. And then we move on very quickly to our cuffs. Now we've got 2 sets of those. One is the lining, one is the upper material. They're exactly the same front to back. On the girls' pattern, they are different, but here they're the same. So you want to put the lining on the upper material, and we're just closing the top edge. And in my case, of course, it's the same. I've got linen for both. You can interface one side, but actually I don't think necessarily for doll's clothes that is prudent, but I mean, I did it and you could do it too. It didn't do it any harm. Cut back the seam allowance. And then we want to top stitch the seam allowance onto the lining, and that is the part that hasn't got interfacing on if you ironed on interfacing, which you don't necessarily need to. And I have a stitch length of 3, and I stitch that seam allowance down. Really pull the fabric apart while you're doing it, and when you come to the actual course for this, you'll also have all the videos from the girls' blouse, and there's a ton of stuff in there, from piping to putting in lace and ruffles and what have you. It's really an exciting course. I hope you really enjoy it. Now put the ends of the cuffs on top of each other and sew them together. And again, we have a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and now we're just going to finger iron them apart. You can do all of this at the sewing machine. You don't even need to get up. And here where we have the seam, it gets a bit bulky, so you cut that away and then just work out the seam. Now the important thing here is that you turn your cuffs so the stitch line disappears. You don't want to see it. And then you take that seam, and that is what lies against the underside of your sleeve. You put the seams on top of each other, and you put some vertical pins in, or other pins, don't really matter for this, to be honest. Pin it in, and we now pin the sleeve to the cuff until the point that you have that snip where we're going to put the pleat in. So I do that from one side, and then I start again from the other side, and I pin it to that pleat. And then, of course, once we've done that, we can just put the pleat in. Push it apart. There we go. And now we've got a tiny little box pleat, and I'm going to secure that, and then we can sew that all the way around. Now it's easier to sew from the inside, so what you want to do is turn that little cuff before you go onto the sewing machine, so that you're not sewing from the cuff side, because that will always feel like it's pushing a little bit. So I'm sewing from the side that is the sleeve, and I go all the way around, and it's not as tight as you would have thought. I thought this would be really difficult, and I was pleasantly surprised that it wasn't, so don't worry about that. Some of the sleeves, yep, I wouldn't do it. This one was wide enough to do it. Now the final step for the cuff will be to turn it up and then secure it, but that would just be in the way for now. So what we're going to do first is to put gather stitches all the way around my little sleeve, and I go all the way down to that point where I have that snip which indicates the front, and to the same height on the other side of the sleeve as well. Longest stitch length available when you do that, and then we're going to put the sleeve in. First you align the underarm seam and put that one in, so make sure that they sit right on top of each other. And then I'm also going to align the shoulder snip and the head of the sleeve. There we go. Then pull those bobbin threads until it fits in really nicely. You just want to make sure that you've got like the same amount of gathers to the right and left of the shoulder seam, that's all. There you go. And you also don't want any tenseness lower down, and also you don't want it to be held in at all. That goes in fairly flat in that area. And you can always adjust your gathers afterwards once you've done the other side. So once I've pinned this, come on the other side. And I'm going to pull the bobbin threads again until it fits in. And that's why I like the gather threads to really start quite low down, because I don't need to secure them. I just pull them and then I pull it back out until it fits in really nicely. That makes my life easier. On the Western blouse for the girls, you'll notice that the sleeve is really, really big. Actually, you'll see it in a minute, because what happened was a lot of my footage went missing. I have no idea what I did with it. It was the whole sewing it in. So there was 3 or 4 clips actually that went haywire. I don't know. Sometimes you have a bad day. And because I have this missing footage, I took the footage from the girls' blouse to just show you this step. And you can here see the really, really big sleeve. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Then you're going to put the sleeve in nice and flat. Make sure nothing is bunched up underneath it. There you go. And your stitch line now should lie right between those 2 gather lines that you put in. That's 1 centimeter. And that makes sure that the gathers are really nice and even. So you can't just put 1 gather thread in. It doesn't work. It won't be very tidy. You need 2 gather threads, 1 close to the edge and 1 foot width. And in the center of that is going to be a centimeter seam allowance. So now I've put this in. Make very sure again that you have got no pins in there. Bunch it up a little bit in your hands just to feel it, because I have left pins in and we don't want that, because those knives on the overlock are very expensive. They're £30. That is a lot of money. So then we overlock it, and again make sure you can see I'm overlocking from the inside. That's always a thing, otherwise it's very easy to cut into the fabric. And there we go. Now just a little tip here for ironing. Some people actually iron across. Never ever do that. You iron the sleeve flat. So when people talk about iron the sleeve flat, this is what they mean. You just make sure that what you've just stitched and the overlocking and everything is nicely together. And then you steam where you have got the gathers, but you do not force that down ever.
Back to my little doll's blouse now. You can see here I've serged it all the way around, and now I can turn up my cuff and I can just secure it with a few hand stitches. There's absolutely no need to go under the sewing machine, especially since that is getting a little bit tight now. So I'm just doing that by hand, sew it in, and voila. Now, final steps, we're going to serge the edge here, and then we're going to top stitch it. So serge along there and stitch length 3 to 3.5. You want the hem turned up so that the hem is just a little bit wider than the serging, and it's usually just under 1 centimeter. And then on my puff machine on the foot on the right hand side, I've got this beautiful red line that I align everything with. It's just my line, it is. And so I align the folded edge of the fabric with that, and that will just quite naturally stitch almost at the top of my serging. And that's what you want to aim for, really. What you don't want is to sew like right down at the bottom. I see that sometimes and it's not very nice. What you want to try to do is go as far to the top as you can, and then at the end you can tuck in that serging tail and secure that as well so that it doesn't stick out. That makes it then really beautiful and neat. And that's almost it, man. Almost at the end. Here I have to pull a little bit. It did get stuck. I tell you what, don't ever buy electronic machines as your first machines. It's such a disappointment. The mechanical ones are so much better. Now you're going to put the collar on top of each other and the front, so it sits as it will be when the blouse is on. And then you go to the corner of your buttonhole, and wherever that is, that's where you sew your button on. One thing to note when you're sewing on a button is that you want to be left with a little stem. And that little stem is just that extra room that you get when you do up the blouse and you have 2 layers of blouse there so that it doesn't look tight and it still just looks like it's floating on top. That's what you want. Now, you want to also put them on really securely just in case this is for a smaller child, and in case it's really a small child, please don't use buttons. You need to use cam snaps, something that they can't pry off and swallow. Really important, safety first. But if you're making this as suggested for girls 8 and up, they suggest for American girl dolls, would you believe it? So anyway, they are not going to swallow those buttons, so that's okay. I'm going to just have a loop here, go around, count my thread, and I'm really done. Now then, do up the top button and then put on the other buttons. And for vertical buttons, you always want to aim for the center of your buttonhole rather than the top edge, okay? Because you don't want them to push up or anything. I see that going wrong for people a lot. And then I put it on my dolly just to have another look at that sleeve, and I think it's just absolutely perfect.
And that's it. We're done with the blouse. I hope you really enjoyed it and you got something out of it. Now it's like so many little tricks in there. It really is fantastic to sew up dolls' clothes when you want to learn how to sew and you don't want to waste a lot of fabric. So I hope you sew plenty of dolls' clothes, and this might even help you with another pattern you've got and where you're stuck on making a blouse. Don't forget, you also get the skirt with this. The skirt is free, don't forget, and you can get downloaded from frocksandfrolics.com under the vintage collection. And of course, this is going to be under the dolls collection. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did like it, then subscribe, click the little bell so that you get notified when there's a new video. And please leave comments below. If you're watching from my academy, you can always click on watch on YouTube and then come over and leave a comment, leave a thumbs up. It really does help to spread the word about the videos from Frocks and Frolics. And I hope to see you soon again for another project. Bye for now.